I didn't notice the graffiti until the morning sun hit the east side of my fence just right. It wasn't spray paint from some bored teenagers or a random act of vandalism. No, this was worse. It was deliberate. Scrawled in thick, black paint were the words, "Non-compliant property." All caps. Sloppy, rushed, but loud and clear. Right on the cedar slats I stained myself last summer. I stood there in my robe, coffee in hand, jaw clenched so tight I nearly cracked a molar. My name's Damon Holloway. I've lived in this neighborhood for 7 years, and I've never had an issue until the HOA board got taken over by Lorraine Pratt, your classic pastel cardigan tyrant with a clipboard permanently fused to her hand. She's the kind of woman who files complaints about someone's grass being aggressively tall and thinks wind chimes are a threat to the community's moral fabric. Lorraine had been itching to make an example out of me since I replaced my backyard fence with a darker stain than she preferred. The guidelines said neutral tones.
Choses voile nu.
Apparently, her definition of neutral stops at beige. Lorraine, I muttered, crouching to get a closer look at the paint. It was still tacky, which meant it was fresh, which meant someone did this overnight. I didn't need a detective to figure out who. I stormed back inside, grabbed my phone, and scrolled through the HOA contact list that Lorraine herself had emailed out last month. Sure enough, her number was listed under HOA president. I called. She picked up on the second ring. "Good morning. This is Lorraine Pratt," she chirped. "Lorraine, did you or someone from the HOA paint on my property last night?" "Excuse me?" Her voice pitched up in that fake shocked tone. "I've got non-compliant property written across my fence in black paint."
You know anything about that?
"Well," she said, dragging the word out, "if your property is in violation, the HOA reserves the right to mark it accordingly." "You're telling me you vandalized my fence?" "Oh, Damon, don't be dramatic. It's community enforcement. You painted on my private property." "It's not private when it's visible from the sidewalk," she snapped. "And we've issued you 3 notices. You've ignored them." I hung up. No point in arguing with a woman who thinks she owns the zip code. Now, I'm not the kind of guy who lets things go. I work in logistics, I plan ahead for a living. And this was going to be handled properly. First thing I did was call the police. Officer Reyes came by, took a look at the fence, and raised an eyebrow. "That's not gang tagging," he said. "Looks official. But you're telling me the HOA did this?" "I have reason to believe so," I said. "And the HOA president basically admitted it." "Did you record the call?"
No, he sighed.
"It's your word against hers. But if you catch them in the act, that's a different story." That's all I needed to hear. I went online that afternoon and ordered 2 high-definition motion sensor cameras. One for the backyard facing the fence, and another for the front porch. I wasn't just going to catch whoever did this, I was going to bury them in evidence. 3 nights later, it happened again. This time it was red paint. Violation. Fence color scrawled right over the black letters. I could barely read the original insult underneath it. But what they didn't count on was the blinking red light on my new camera, quietly watching from the corner of the roof. I loaded the footage on my laptop the next morning, half expecting to see some kid on a dare. But no, there she was, Lorraine, in a pink windbreaker and white sneakers. Flashlight in one hand, spray can in the other. She even brought a step stool with her. I watched her wobble up, shake the can, and vandalize my fence like she was tagging a subway car in the 80s. She looked over her shoulder once, then went back to spraying. I nearly laughed. The HOA president caught red-handed literally. The next step was easy. I took the footage to Officer Reyes. "Holy hell," he muttered, watching the video. "That's her? That's Lorraine Pratt," I confirmed. "President of the HOA." "Well," he said, sitting back, "that's felony vandalism on private property. Especially since she used tools and planned it out. Want to press charges?" "Absolutely." He nodded. We'll bring her in. But I wasn't done yet. I made a few copies of the video, one on a USB, one on a cloud drive, and one I emailed to myself just in case. Then I printed out screenshots and taped them to the inside of my kitchen window facing the street. Let the neighbors see what their beloved HOA president did at 2 in the morning. By noon, I got a knock on my door. It was my neighbor, Pete, from 2 doors down. "Hey, Damon, is that real?" he asked, pointing toward the photo of Lorraine mid-spray.
Yup.
Caught her on camera Tuesday night. Already filed charges. He let out a low whistle. "She's been threatening to find me over my satellite dish. Said it was too reflective. She's out of control." Word traveled fast. By that evening, I had 5 neighbors show up asking for copies of the footage to bring to the next HOA meeting. Apparently, Lorraine had been harassing more people than I realized, everything from mailbox height to the color of welcome mats. The icing on the cake came the next morning. I was sipping my coffee, watching the sunrise, when a black sedan rolled up in front of Lorraine's house. 2 uniformed officers stepped out. I didn't even try to hide my grin as they knocked on her door. She answered in a robe, curlers still in her hair. 15 minutes later, she was in handcuffs, being escorted to the car while half the block watched from their porches. And just like that, Lorraine Pratt, HOA queen, enforcer of beige, destroyer of fences, was arrested on felony vandalism charges. I shut my front door and leaned against it, satisfied. But I had a feeling things weren't over just yet. The day after Lorraine's arrest, my street felt different. Quieter. Not in a peaceful way, more like the air before a thunderstorm. Curtains fluttered as neighbors peeked outside with cautious curiosity. The woman who'd once strutted around with a clipboard and a fake smile was now the talk of the block, and not in the way she would have liked. I didn't have long to enjoy the calm before things escalated again. Around noon, I got a knock at the door. This time it wasn't a neighbor, it was a tall, wiry man in a gray suit holding a leather portfolio. His shoes had that scuffed, over-polished look of someone who spent too much time trying to look important. He introduced himself as Victor Langley, legal counsel for the Oak Ridge HOA. "Mr. Holloway," he began, not even waiting for an invitation inside, "we're here to resolve this unfortunate misunderstanding before it becomes a distraction to the community." I leaned against the doorframe. "You mean the criminal charges against your president? We view this as a civil matter. Lorraine's actions, while unfortunate, were taken in her capacity as president and under the interpretation of enforcement authority. We're prepared to offer a formal letter of apology and cover the cost of your fence restoration if you agree to drop the charges." I blinked. "You think I'm going to let this go for a letter and a paint job?" Victor didn't flinch. "We believe it's in everyone's best interest. Civil disputes like this erode trust. And frankly, the HOA doesn't want unnecessary legal entanglements." I crossed my arms. "She vandalized private property. That's not a civil dispute. That's a crime. And she didn't just do it to me, I've got 5 neighbors with similar complaints. This isn't going away because you flashed some letterhead." He gave me a tight, practiced smile. "Then I'm afraid we'll need to prepare for a more formal response. In the meantime, I'd advise against distributing footage further. It could be construed as defamation." I raised an eyebrow. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm giving you professional guidance." I shut the door in his face. That evening, Officer Reyes called. He'd been keeping me updated as a courtesy after I filed the report. "We processed the footage and filed the charges with the state attorney's office," he said. "They're taking this seriously. Turns out Lorraine's got a record 2 sealed complaints from her last HOA in Crescent Bluffs. We're working on getting them unsealed." I sat back in my chair. "So, this isn't her first time doing something shady." "Looks that way. And get this, we've had 3 more residents file reports since she was picked up. One guy said she fined him for hosting political signage because he had a veteran flag in his window. Another said she threatened to revoke his garage privileges for not attending a community barbecue. She was running this place like a personal fiefdom.
Exactly.
The DA's office might push for a broader investigation. If she was misusing her position to intimidate or even manipulate finances, this could turn into something big. I didn't sleep much that night. Not from stress, but from planning. Lorraine was no longer in power, but the HOA board still operated as if nothing had changed. I needed to see inside their machine. So the next morning, I filed a request to inspect HOA financial records and board meeting minutes. Under the Davis-Sterling Act, they had 5 business days to comply. 3 days later, I got a call from Marcus Denton, the HOA vice president. He sounded like he'd just been woken up, or maybe like he was trying to sound inconvenienced on purpose. Damon, we received your request. I'm not sure what you're hoping to find, but we'll have the documents ready for inspection on Friday. Perfect. I'll be there. When Friday came, I drove to the HOA's so-called office, really just a repurposed unit in the community clubhouse. Marcus was there, waiting with 2 cardboard boxes and a manila folder. He looked uncomfortable, like a teenager caught sneaking beer. I've included the last 18 months of financials and meeting minutes, per your request, he said. But I'll need you to review them here. We don't allow documents to leave the premises. I didn't argue. I brought a notepad, a portable scanner, and a fresh travel mug of coffee. I sat down and started combing through the records. Within the first hour, I found discrepancies. There were recurring monthly charges labeled Community Improvement Initiative with no corresponding receipts or records of work completed. Payments were issued to a company called Brightview Solutions, which, according to the state registry, didn't exist. I dug deeper, same vendor, same amounts, every single month. I looked up Marcus, who authorized these payments to Brightview Solutions. He glanced up from his phone. Lorraine handled vendor contracts. She didn't always tell us the details. We trusted her to manage the budget. She was paying a ghost company. He fidgeted. That can't be right. I scanned in the records and took photos of every questionable line item. It wasn't just Brightview, there were also reimbursements tagged under public relations that matched dates when Lorraine hosted private events at her house. HOA funds were being siphoned and disguised as community expenses. I compiled everything into a folder and drove straight to the DA's office. The receptionist raised an eyebrow when I dropped the stack on the counter. I've got evidence of financial fraud connected to an ongoing vandalism case, I said. It's bigger than one incident. They took me seriously. 2 days later, detectives served a search warrant on Lorraine's property. The news spread faster than a wildfire. A team in plain clothes carried out boxes from her garage, files, electronics, even a shredder that still smelled like burnt paper. The same day, Marcus called again. This time, his voice wavered. I think we need to hold an emergency board meeting, he said. People are demanding answers. We'll be appointing a new interim president, and we want you to be there. I showed up that evening at the clubhouse. The room was packed. Folding chairs lined the walls, and neighbors stood in the back, whispering nervously. A few people looked stunned, like they'd just realized how deep the rot had gone. We're here tonight, Marcus began, to address serious concerns regarding the former president's conduct and the future of our HOA. I stood. Before we talk about the future, let's talk about what happened. Lorraine used her authority to harass homeowners, misuse funds, and commit crimes. The only reason we're here now is because she finally got caught. But the rest of this board let it happen. A ripple moved through the room. Marcus raised his hands. We didn't know what she was doing, then why didn't anyone ask questions? Why weren't vendor payments reviewed? Why was she allowed to operate without oversight? No one answered. I continued. We need a full audit. Independent. Not someone picked by this board. And we need new bylaws that limit the board's power, require community votes on major decisions, and set term limits. A woman in the back, Jenna, who ran the local bakery, stood up. I second that. I've lived here 12 years. Never seen anything like this.
More voices joined in.
People who had felt silenced. People who had stories. One after another, they recounted fines that had no basis, threats made behind closed doors, and letters that bent the rules just enough to scare them into compliance. The dam had broken. That night, the board voted to suspend all current members pending an audit and appointed a temporary committee made up of residents, not insiders. I was asked to serve as chair. I didn't say yes immediately, but I didn't say no. As I left the clubhouse, someone tapped me on the shoulder. It was Pete from 2 doors down. "You've done more in a week than any of us have done in years," he said. I nodded. The system let her get away with it for too long. "Yeah," he said, "but not anymore." The temporary committee met for the first time on a rainy Wednesday evening. We gathered in the old community library, a room that hadn't seen this many people since the last hurricane preparedness seminar. The committee was made up of 9 residents, each one elected by open ballot during the emergency meeting. No one from the old board made the cut. I was voted chair, not because I asked for it, but because no one else wanted the mess that came with it. The first order of business was clear: uncover everything the prior board, especially Lorraine, had buried. We divided tasks. I handled financial oversight along with Jenna, who'd once managed accounting for a regional chain of markets. Pete took on infrastructure review. He owned a construction company and knew how to read a site plan better than anyone. The rest split up legal compliance, vendor contracts, and communications archives. We gave ourselves 2 weeks to gather findings, but by day 5, things were already unraveling. Jenna walked into my garage where we'd set up a makeshift command center, folding tables, laptops, a scanner, and a whiteboard that was quickly filling up with red arrows and post-it notes. She dropped a stack of papers on the table and ran both hands through her hair, visibly shaken.
"She filed a lien," she said.
"Against a family who never even received a violation notice." I stared at the paperwork. "You sure it wasn't a mistake?" She used the HOA account to pay a private attorney in Clearwater to process it. "It's real." And get this, the family sold their home 6 months later. Below market. Probably just to make it go away. Who was the attorney? Eric Mandel. Same one used for all the compliance escalations Lorraine approved. He wasn't vetted. Just showed up on the books 2 years ago. Paid monthly, like a retainer. I scanned the documentation. The lien was filed under the claim of chronic non-response to mandated improvements, which, according to the minutes, was Lorraine's phrase for homeowners who didn't return her letters fast enough. "We need to contact that family," I said. "This might be bigger than fines and fence paint." Jenna nodded. "Already did. They live in Palm Harbor now. The husband's willing to talk." The next day, I drove out to Palm Harbor with Pete. We met Nicholas and his wife, Rhea, at a small cafe near their new place. Nicholas was in his mid-40s, wore a faded veteran's cap, and had the kind of posture that suggested he was used to being on high alert. "She threatened to fine us for having a grill on the driveway," he said, sipping black coffee. "Then said we ignored 3 warnings. We never got anything. Next thing we knew, a lien was filed. I went to court, but they had a paper trail that made it look like I was dodging them."
Rhea leaned in.
"We couldn't afford to fight it, so we sold. Lost nearly 30 grand on the sale." She did this to others too.
"I talked to our old neighbor last week.
He said 3 families left the neighborhood over stuff like this." Pete jotted down details while I recorded the conversation on my phone with their permission. Nicholas handed over a folder with court documents, emails, and a copy of the lien notice. It was enough to prove a pattern. Back in Oak Ridge, I contacted the county clerk's office and requested a full list of liens filed by the HOA in the last 3 years. The results were staggering. 7 homes, all filed under Lorraine's term. All processed through the same attorney. None of the cases had been disclosed to the community. I brought everything to Officer Reyes. "This isn't just harassment," I said. "This is fraud. She fabricated violations, then used HOA funds to push legal actions and force sales. It's theft through paperwork. He looked through the files, flipping each page slowly. This goes way beyond local enforcement. We'll loop in the state attorney's office. If she profited from these sales, we're talking about racketeering. What about the attorney? If he knowingly filed fraudulent claims, he'll face disbarment and charges too. Within 72 hours, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement opened a formal investigation. Detectives arrived in unmarked vehicles, collected HOA servers, Lorraine's personal laptop, and every financial record we'd flagged. They interviewed board members past and present. Marcus Denton, now fully cooperative, turned over a private email chain between Lorraine and Mandel. It included phrases like, "make sure they're boxed in," and "we'll force the sale if they stall." The investigators found something we hadn't. A private account, opened under a shell company called LPR Holdings. The initials were no coincidence. Lorraine had been funneling compliance settlement fees into it. At least 4 homeowners had signed checks under pressure without realizing they weren't paying the HOA, but a personal account. A week later, the story broke on local news. The headline read, "HOA President Under Criminal Investigation for Property Scheme." They showed blurry footage of Lorraine being escorted from her home again, this time without the pastel windbreaker. The anchor mentioned charges being considered: wire fraud, racketeering, abuse of authority, and falsification of legal documents. The community exploded. Neighbors who'd once kept their heads down now flooded public forums. People came forward with stories of mysteriously retracted approvals, inspections that never happened, and fees that didn't match any rulebook. We called another emergency meeting, this time to vote on dissolving the HOA's authority temporarily until a full charter revision could be completed. Over 2/3 of the residents showed up and voted unanimously in favor. A task force was formed to write a new charter with transparency requirements, spending limits, and a public ledger for all financial activity. The most surreal moment came during a live town hall, broadcast on the local public access channel. I stood at the podium, facing rows of people who had once avoided eye contact in the grocery store. "We were told compliance was for our own good," I said. "But it was a cover for control. No one should lose their home over a fence color or a grill. We deserve better. We deserve fairness, not fear." Applause filled the room. Not polite claps, real, thunderous applause. It wasn't just about Lorraine anymore. It was about taking the neighborhood back from a system that had long been allowed to operate in the shadows. That night, as I walked home, Pete caught up with me. "You ever think we'd be here?" he asked. "I thought we'd get the fence cleaned up. That was it." He laughed. "Now we're rewriting the HOA's constitution. Shows what happens when people stop ducking and start documenting." He nodded. "You think she'll do time?" "If there's any justice, yeah. But even if she doesn't, she'll never control this place again." And she didn't. 3 weeks later, the courts froze all her assets pending trial. The state disbarred Mandel. The families who'd been forced out were contacted by the Attorney General's office for restitution. And Lorraine? She was indicted on 8 counts. Her court date was set for the following spring. Meanwhile, Oak Ridge changed. The fences stayed walnut. The grills came back. Neighbors talked more, waved more, helped each other again. And every month, the new committee posted every dollar spent on a public board outside the clubhouse. Justice didn't just come in courtrooms, it came in the way the neighborhood refused to be ruled by fear again. The neighborhood was still in the process of stitching itself back together when the forensic audit team arrived. They weren't from any HOA oversight agency because, as we'd all discovered too late, those didn't really exist in any meaningful way, but from the County Inspector General's office, brought in through a special request from the state attorney after the fraud charges were filed against Lorraine. Their team consisted of 2 auditors and a data analyst, all with a kind of quiet, methodical energy that made you instinctively want to clean up your surroundings. I met them at the clubhouse, which had been stripped of its pastel decor and faux inspirational quotes. The walls were bare now, except for one large cork board we'd hung to track the progress of the community reform. I handed them a binder of organized documents, every transaction, every email chain, every internal memo we'd pulled from the digital backups before the servers were seized. The lead auditor, a woman named Karen Delgado, flipped through the first few pages. She didn't ask many questions, just nodded occasionally and highlighted sections with a smooth, practiced motion. "This is more organized than half the municipalities we've investigated," she said, not looking up. "Probably because we didn't trust anyone else to do it," I replied. She offered a brief, neutral acknowledgement and kept reading. While they set up in the back room, I headed back to my garage-turned-office. Jenna was already there, working through a spreadsheet of reimbursed expenses. She looked up when I walked in, her face pale. "You're gonna want to see this." She turned the laptop screen toward me. It was a PDF of a bank statement, one of the ones Lorraine had buried under a mislabeled folder. There were quarterly payments made out to a company called LGL Partners, listed as Landscape Oversight Consulting. Over $25,000 in the last fiscal year alone. "Let me guess," I said. "That company doesn't exist either?" "Oh, it exists," Jenna said. "That's the problem. It's registered to Lorraine's brother-in-law. Lives in Sarasota. Never done a day of landscaping in his life. He owns a vape shop." I stared at the screen. So, she was laundering HOA money through family. And not even subtly. The invoices are copy-pasted templates. Same typos, same formatting. You'd think if you were committing fraud, you'd at least spell maintenance right. "Get it to Karen," I said. "Right now." By the end of the week, the audit team had compiled a list of financial irregularities spanning almost 3 years. The final number was staggering, over $170,000 in misappropriated funds. And that was just what we could prove. But the real bomb dropped when Karen called me back to the clubhouse on a rainy Thursday evening. "There's something you need to see," she said, pointing to her laptop. It was a scanned letter, dated almost 2 years ago. It had the HOA's letterhead and Lorraine's signature at the bottom. The letter authorized a temporary compliance enforcement partnership with a private security firm, Bayfront Civil Solutions. The firm, according to the letter, had permission to conduct after-hours inspections and enforce minor code violations without prior notice. That alone was bizarre. But what made it worse was that Bayfront Civil Solutions didn't appear in any of the HOA's meeting minutes. No vote. No discussion. Nothing. And the firm's business license had been revoked the year before the letter was dated. She created a fake enforcement firm, Karen said. She used it to justify surveillance and physical intimidation. We've already confirmed that 2 of her so-called inspectors have criminal records. 1 for extortion. 1 for impersonating law enforcement. I felt my stomach turn. So, those weren't just neighborhood volunteers?
No.
And we believe they were used to pressure homeowners into compliance. In at least one case, they showed up at a resident's door and demanded cash payment to resolve a violation quietly. Who? She pulled up a file. Eugene Kwan. Lived at the end of West Timber. Moved out last fall. Never told anyone why. I stared at the screen. He had a daughter. She used to sell lemonade during the summers. Karen nodded. He filed a report with the sheriff's office, but it was dismissed as a neighborhood dispute. We're reopening it. Within 24 hours, Eugene was on a Zoom call with the county prosecutor. He provided a detailed statement, including security footage from his Ring camera footage that showed one of Lorraine's inspectors flashing a fake badge and threatening to tow his car for being non-operational. It was a brand new hybrid SUV. With that evidence, the sheriff's office issued arrest warrants for 2 of Lorraine's former contractors. Both were picked up within the week. One tried to run, he didn't get far. The story hit regional news. Not just another HOA horror story, but a full-blown criminal conspiracy. Financial fraud, wire fraud, extortion, impersonation of law enforcement, and abuse of power. Lorraine's charges ballooned. Her attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal. The state attorney declined. Back in Oak Ridge, the neighborhood was undergoing a transformation. The temporary committee finalized the new charter, which included a ban on closed-door meetings, mandatory annual audits by a third-party CPA, and a community vote for all board decisions over $500. We also added a clause banning lifetime service on the board. No more tiny tyrants ruling by inertia. The new charter passed by unanimous vote. We held elections for a permanent board 2 weeks later. Jenna ran for treasurer and won by a landslide. Pete declined a position but agreed to remain as a consultant for infrastructure planning. As for me, they asked if I'd consider running for president. I declined. I didn't do this to run the place, I said, standing in front of the crowd during the final town hall of the transition. I did it because someone had to say enough. And now all of you are saying it, too. The applause was quiet, respectful, and deeply earned. That evening, as I walked past the now graffiti-free fence, the one I'd power-washed and restained myself, I saw something that made me stop. Across the street, the Kellers were out with their 2 daughters, drawing chalk art on the driveway. 2 houses down, the Rodriguezes had set up a fire pit and were roasting marshmallows with neighbors. The air felt lighter, not just from the absence of fear, but from the presence of something we hadn't had in a long time: trust. The final chapter came 3 months later, when Lorraine stood trial. The courtroom was packed. The prosecution presented every piece of evidence: the fake companies, the forged letters, the fraudulent liens, the threats, the payouts, the cover-ups. Her defense tried to paint her as a misunderstood enforcer, someone who just wanted order. But facts don't bend to intention, and neither did the jury. She was found guilty on 6 felony counts, sentenced to 14 years, with no parole for at least 9. Outside the courthouse, reporters stopped me as I was leaving. "You're the homeowner who started all this, right?" "The fence?" "Yeah," I said. "What would you say to other people dealing with abusive HOAs?" I looked past her, out toward the courthouse steps where several Oak Ridge residents stood together, talking and laughing. A group that once kept to themselves now stood united. "Document everything," I said. "Ask questions. And never let someone with a clipboard and a title make you forget your rights." Then I walked away, finally ready to get back to living in the neighborhood I'd fought to save.